Well, everyone, there are three main operating systems that you can basically get on your devices, on your phones. It's usually iOS, Android, and then basically One UI. Now, One UI is based off, stock Android, but I would almost at this point consider One UI its own thing. I mean, One UI is very different than Android, and I think that's a great thing. I think there needs to be a lot more competition on the Android space, and although there are lots of advantages for One UI over Android, let's go and see how all three of these operating systems kind of compare to one another. Now, starting off with iOS, this is my go-to operating system. This is the one that I use on an everyday basis. I think it's great, and I think it gives me probably the best experience out of all of these, specific operating systems. It's definitely not perfect though. This is not a perfect operating system, but iOS has always been pretty smooth. It's been pretty fast, and although it can be slow in gaining some features over time, it's always been pretty good to me, and I do like iOS a lot. Now with One UI, this is the operating system that is on a majority of Samsung phones. If you bought a Samsung phone in the last 6 years, usually it's going to be coming with One UI unless you have a very, very old, Android phone. Now with the Samsung Galaxy S23 here, it's been rocking One UI very, very well. We're currently on One UI 5. One UI 6 is going to be coming out probably later this year. So with a phone like the Galaxy S23, what's always good about the current One UI devices is that a lot of these phones, if we're kind of comparing all these ones, they always have usually one of the better chipsets of that year with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 currently. And with a mixture of that, as well as a mixture of the amount of features you're getting within a One UI device, it is actually pretty insane how good One UI has gotten. It used to be a really bad version of software on Samsung Experience, if you remember that, like Android 8, Android 7, Android 6. People used to make fun of it all the time, even on TouchWiz. Nowadays, it is honestly getting a lot better. Now with stock Android, this is like iOS for Android. It gives you basically almost the exact same experience. I wouldn't say the exact same experience. It gives you a very similar experience to something like iOS, but it still gives you a lot more features too compared to something like iOS in my opinion. And I will say with stock Android, there are lots of features as well. One of my favorite things starting off with stock Android is basically the ability of getting software updates usually as soon as they come out. So very soon, Android 14, the betas of Android 14 could be coming out. And what's going to end up happening, and I think the betas already have came out, I kind of forgot about that. And what's going to end up happening is that once these updates start coming out, well, you're going to have a phone that is going to be getting the latest and greatest updates as soon as an update comes out. Now, to give you some perspective on something like a One UI phone, the problem with One UI is that as soon as an update comes out, you pretty much have to wait a long period of time, and it is a staggered release, meaning that once the Galaxy, once Android 14 comes out, it's not going to come out on all the phones at the same time. It doesn't really work like that on the Pixels either, unless it's a beta. What's going to happen is the Galaxy S23 is going to get the update first, then maybe a month later the S22, then maybe a month after that the S21, and it takes a long time and even by the time it comes to the next phones, it doesn't even come out at the same time. There's different versions and different cell connections and all that stuff. So it can be a long time before you start getting more, before you get the update on something like a One UI device. But this brings me to iOS. And this is why I think iPhones have a leg up compared to any Android phone, and that is with the software updates as soon as they come out. The day a software update comes out for the iPhone 14 Pro, which we have here, which is the latest, most expensive iPhone Apple makes, the same day this iPhone gets an update will be the same day that the lowest supported iPhone on iOS 16 also gets an update. So that is a massive thing, and that is something I've always liked about iPhones. If you were getting a phone like an iPhone 14 Pro, well, even if you get an iPhone 8, you're going to be getting the same software updates, and the iPhone 8 came out in 2017. A phone that is still on One UI, right? It's going to be good, but the software longevity isn't as great on One UI, and the days in which the software update comes out is also a little annoying. Like I said, once you get something like the Samsung Galaxy or even a Google Pixel 7, it's a lot better on the Pixel side, but even though you're getting more features and everything on a One UI device, the problem sometimes is, well, if you're getting that next version of software, you may have to wait a few months. My Galaxy S20, I think, got One UI 5 before my S21. It's a very weird experience. I just don't like how Samsung does their software releases, but the software itself is pretty good. With stock Android, it is a little bit better, especially in a beta. So once Android 14 is coming out, or it's almost coming out in a beta right now, well, what's going to happen is as soon as Android 14 comes out in the next beta and the beta after, well, you're going to be able to go ahead and update to it via your Pixel. So this one is always first in line. The latest Pixel usually is the first one to get the software update. And whenever Google says an update's coming out, it usually comes out for your phone during that time. So that is something I've always felt like on the Android side, Google does really well. With One UI, that is one area that Samsung could be taking a, kind of a step up in my opinion. Now, kind of bringing these phones closer a little bit, with the animations and kind of the fluidity behind all these, it's always been pretty good. It's always been pretty good. I've always felt like all these phones were pretty fast, and now that they all have like 120 hertz panels, I think it's a 90 hertz panel here, it's fairly good. Now, another big thing between all these is basically their app stores. Because these are both Android, they are both getting the same type of experience with the same type of Google Play Store, same application support. With the iPhones, you are getting its own app store, which is great too because there's still tons of applications on all these. However, there is no third-party application support on something like the iPhone. With a stock Android phone like this one or even on One UI, you have the ability of installing third-party applications. So these things can include emulators. There are tons of emulators available. There's so many games and applications and so many things that may not be available on the stock app store on the Android side that is available on third-party apps. And as long as you know what you're doing, you can pretty much get a great experience from something like a stock Android or even a One UI device over something like an iPhone. But it always kind of comes down to one big question that I've seen is that worth the risk or the trade-off of not being in the Apple ecosystem? So one thing that we have within iPhones is basically we have like things like iMessage, we have like FaceTime, we have so many things like that. And this is a better experience, I would say, compared to something like Google Messages that we basically have on our, Android side. Now, Google is probably going to come out and make Apple somehow, support some sort of iMessage on all of them. I don't know what's going to happen there. But if that doesn't happen, so far iOS is, I think, more superior in that case. I always feel like Apple does a great job at bringing all these kind of cool features across their Apple ecosystem. Handoff, the sharing of applications. Now with Macs with universal control, there's so many things like that. And I will say, if it wasn't for iMessage and all that stuff, I would say Samsung probably is next up in line. I mean, although it's more of a hardware feature, things that we do have on Samsung, like, wireless power sharing on other Samsung devices, things like Samsung DeX, that's more software. And that is a really awesome feature we have on, our Samsung phones that we don't have on iPhones and we don't even really have on our Pixels, to be honest. We have like wireless battery sharing, but you can't even charge a Pixel Watch from your Google Pixel. You can charge a Galaxy Watch from your Galaxy. And although, like I said, that's more hardware, that is still a cool feature that we have on something like our Samsung phone. On top of that, with stock Android, although you aren't getting as crazy cool features as One UI device, even maybe as an iPhone, it is still a smooth experience. And I will say I do like getting these updates on a timely manner, and that's always something I've preferred on something like Google Pixels. Another thing going on with the software update side is with an iPhone. Basically, there are more updates, I would say, or there have historically been more updates, in my opinion, on something like an iPhone than at least on something like a stock Android phone. There's usually like one update a month. One UI gets a lot of updates too, almost every single time. Usually I go ahead and get into my settings panel here. Usually it might actually be one time a month now I think about it. You might be actually getting another update. And it's kind of funny. Usually I'm up to date, I'm usually scheduling them automatically. So there's updates all the time on all these devices, but I might say that every update might be a little more significant on an iPhone. So at the end of the day, I don't think there's one specific version of software that's significantly better than the other one. I think they are all very good and they all have their place in line. But I would probably tell you that if I had to pick one, I think iOS is usually the one I would probably recommend using, at least for me personally, just because I'm tapped into the ecosystem. But I think One UI has gotten so much better throughout the years. And I think if there's an award for like most improved, I think One UI is definitely up there. I think One UI has improved more in the last like 3 years than iOS or stock Android, in my opinion. So stock Android is still good. I like it a lot. I like the software updates that it comes with, but I think it's kind of gotten boring, and I do like iOS and One UI a little bit more. So that pretty much covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out.